hope you can all hear me. I'm Chris Nelson. I'm the Executive Chairman for the British Chamber in the Philippines. And I'd like to thank you all for coming on to this webinar today, exploring the franchising sector in the Philippines. With us today speaking, we have first of all Sam Christopher Lim. He's Director of Special Projects at ASEAN Integration and Chair of the Philippine Franchise Association. He's also SVP of Marketing and Strategy at FranCorp, another premier franchise operation, and President of U Franchise Sales and Management. He has obviously a diverse background in international marketing at Unilever, covering a range of markets both in Bangkok, Shanghai, and he also worked in London. We also have the pleasure and the expertise of the gentleman sitting next to me, Andy Sharonsky, Managing Director of ANC Associates, a consultancy firm specializing in change management and in the food and FMCG companies. He has over 28 years experience in the food industry and 10 years of advising on that in Asia. Let me quickly say how we're going to work today. So after I finish this quick introduction, Chris Lim will take us through from his perspective in terms of the Philippine franchise sector. We'll then have Andy speaking on how to successfully enter the Philippine franchise market. And then we will have a Q&A. Obviously, while this is going on, as you know, please type in your questions and we will try to take them. If you can put on those questions, whether it's for Chris or for Andy or for both, then please let us know. Once again, good morning to everybody in London, and it's a warm welcome from here in the Philippines. And I'd now like to kindly hand over to Chris Lim. Thank you, Chris.
Hi, thanks a lot, Chris. Yeah, so my name's Chris Lim. I'm with U Franchise and FranCorp. And I just wanted to take the next 10 minutes to talk a bit more about franchising in the Philippines and the franchising sector. If we go to the next slide. Now, before I even get into the franchise sector, let's look first at, well, the Philippines as the demographic overview of the Philippines. The Philippines has about 101 million people. What's very interesting about this market is that 23.4 million people, the median age is actually just 23 years old, meaning about 50 million Filipinos are under the age of 23. So there's a lot of millennials here in the Philippines. It's also, the working age population is 66% of people are in the working age population, and it's a very highly urbanized population, about 49%. If we go to the next slide, we see a few more things that actually sets Filipinos apart from the rest of the Southeast Asian neighbors. First is really the preference for international brands. Over the past few years, we've seen many brands that have come in really looking to tap this westernized culture of the Philippines. We were colonized by the Spanish and the Americans, so there is that very Western mindset. There's also that cosmopolitan taste, but the favorite among people is the fact that English is very widely spoken here in the Philippines. The number one in business English proficiency, that's why we do also have a lot of call centers based here. And, well, 10% of the population actually live abroad. I think that's something else about the Philippines. We have 100 million Filipinos, but 10% of that, or about 10 million people, are actually sending money to the Philippines because they're living abroad, whether it's in the UK, whether it's in the US, in Guam, and all these other markets. Going then to the next slide. The Philippines actually has quite a booming GDP. Has quite a booming GDP. Thanks for that. In Asia, we're actually the #1 in terms of GDP growth. In fact, I think in the first quarter of this year, we actually even exceeded China in terms of growth. There's also been a strong credit rating with most of the major banks and credit rating agencies upgrading our credit ratings. And I've talked about this, the young population, it's 100 million people, 60+% are working age. And well, the median age is 23 and more than 33% are actually below 14 years old. So that's very interesting for brands that really cater to the young population, whether they're education, fashion, food, really brands that cater to kids have a strong potential here in the Philippines. The fourth part there is really the 24/7 market. We do have a sub-segment of Filipinos who work for about 1 million Filipinos working for the business process outsourcing industry. So they work 24 hours. That's why convenience stores are doing very well here in the Philippines, because these people have high disposable income and they need services when most things are closed, because their day starts at midnight or at 8 p.m. when the US and the UK are waking up. So that's another thing to think of in the Philippines. Because on the next slide is a study done by Edwards Global Services. It actually ranks the Philippines as one of the top destinations for overseas brands that want to expand into Asia. First of all is Japan and China, because they are the second and third largest markets. But you can see Philippines is up there. A big reason for this is really it's the English-speaking population and the Western mindset of Filipinos. Over the years, we've seen a lot of foreign brands set up shop in the Philippines to use it as their regional headquarters to then penetrate various markets around Asia. They sometimes even use it as their test market to Asianize their brands and their business model to make sure it fits a developing market like the Philippines and like the rest of Southeast Asia. That's just an overview of the Philippines. I'll get into the franchise sector next, in the next slide. The Philippine franchise sector is very robust. There's about 1,500 brands of different franchise brands here. There's about 34% of that is foreign and another 66% is actually homegrown. What's good is that it's actually spread across retail, across food, and across services. So it's not dominated by one segment. A big growing segment now actually is the education industry. So the Philippines has quite a big base of franchisors. But what's more interesting for brands from the UK is the fact that a lot of them actually achieve quite a bit of success in the Philippines, if you see the next slide. Franchising's a key source of growth for a lot of entrepreneurs. We did a study comparing how many franchisors as well as how many franchise outlets there are in multiple countries around the world. I'll just wait for the next slide to come on, but I'll talk through it as we wait for it. Yeah, that's it. The franchising this really plots out in terms of different countries how many franchisors there have and how many franchise outlets, and the numbers there is basically how many outlets can you expect an average to reach if you franchise in the Philippines. Japan, for every brand there's about at least 160 outlets. Here in the Philippines, every brand has at least 96 outlets. We do have some brands who get 2,000 outlets, and of course some who have about 20, 30, 40. But on average, it's about 96 outlets. I did a quick check of the UK. The UK actually, on average, every franchise brand actually reaches 50 outlets, 50 branches, based on the latest study by the British Franchise Association. So you could see here in the Philippines, through franchising, you could actually reach the double the number of those outlets. And versus other Southeast Asian markets like Indonesia and Thailand, who have 80 and 30 respectively, it's quite a high number, even comparing to other markets around the world. This is the reason that here in the Philippines, actually, we have the highest number of certified franchise executives. So this is a qualification from the US. I believe there in the UK, you call it a QFP, or a Qualified Franchise Professional. So here in the Philippines, we have the highest number of CFEs outside the US. So we're actually certified. The Franchise Association here is certified to train, to accredit franchise professionals. And that's why a lot of people do enter the Philippines and make it their central hub. Whether it's Wendy's, whether it's Krispy Kreme, who's actually used the Philippines as their training center for all over Asia. So they send their people here to train, to be able to learn, and then send them out across Southeast Asia. Going to the next slide then, moving then into the trends that franchise brands should be looking at as they look into the Philippines, is the increased local tourism. Two of the top 10 best top islands actually around the world is here in the Philippines. So actually, with 7,100 islands, there has been a lot of increased tourism. So brands that cater to this, whether it's hotel, whether it's F&B, souvenirs, brands that are in this segment have actually been doing well and have started to invest more in the Philippines as our infrastructure starts to develop. Another thing about the Philippines, on the next slide, is mobile access. We still have quite choppy internet here in the Philippines, and that's an understatement, that the internet is still quite slow. But what's interesting, if you look at the next slide, is that we have actually more Facebook users than people subscribe to the internet, just because Facebook is actually free on a lot of the mobile carriers give Facebook for free. We have actually, right now, the last time I talked to the Facebook team, 50 million, or half of Filipinos, are actually on Facebook, even if not all of them have complete internet access. So it's a key medium here to promote brands, and really you could see how the millennial and this young population is really dominating the market here. On the next slide, another thing we see developing in the Philippines is the expansion into secondary cities. Most people who look at the Philippines actually look at Metro Manila as the first entry point. But more and more, with our new president who's based in Davao, south of the Philippines, actually we encourage more brands to look at outside Metro Manila, which is starting to get crowded with many both foreign and local brands. So we have seen a rise of community malls. We've seen people using franchising to penetrate all these secondary cities. And I talked about the business processing sector, who are focusing outside Metro Manila, so giving wealth and spreading wealth outside the key demographic centers. Moving on to the next slide, slide 12, is to the next slide, looking at retail formats. Another thing to look at here in the Philippines is the reason we're able to reach so many franchise outlets is because we have a lot of different retail formats. 3 of the top 10 biggest malls in the world are actually in the Philippines. And more these days, there's been a lot of development of neighborhood groceries. A lot of the major convenience stores have been entering, and shop houses and district malls are also on the rise. So really, Philippines love to go to the malls, and all the different developers have been experimenting and developing new formats, which means more ability for different brands to enter and penetrate both urban and rural locations. Now, just on the last slide then, so we've talked a lot about the formats and the trends and the franchise industry. I think for brands looking at the Philippines, there's a few things I did want to highlight. I mean, in terms of the Filipino mindset, I think first is in the Philippines, there's a big sachet mentality. Sachet are those small packets that you buy shampoo in. I was working in Unilever for a while, and actually here in the Philippines, 80% of Filipinos buy their shampoo in sachets, not in bottles or pumps as you're used to in the UK. And a lot of different brands have been using that mentality. So here in the Philippines, it's one of the few markets you can buy cigarettes per piece. You can buy mobile data for 5 megabytes at a time. So really, if you do come in here, do think of how do you do this, lower the cost of them trying your products. Expect people to do installment payments. We actually franchised a tourism school from Canada here into the Philippines. And one thing we struggled with is in most Western markets, people would either pay 6 months for a semester, 6 months in advance, or even a year in advance. But here in the Philippines, we sometimes have to collect tuition weekly or sometimes monthly. So it's something that really it's ingrained in Filipinos, and it's something you do have to adjust in your business model as you come in. Filipinos also love eating 5 times a day. They love taking photos of their food, Instagram, Facebook, and of course you have a strong chance of success here when you use local celebrity endorsers. Lastly, foreign brands are considered aspirational purchases, so especially British brands. There's a bit of edge, a bit of coolness. I think because the chamber has also been actively promoting British brands, there's an edge of coolness in British brands and a trust in quality. So it is a big advantage for British brands who enter here. That's really it. I had 10 minutes. I did want to take you through quickly a few things about franchising and about Filipinos. But if you did have more questions, we do have Q&As later. And on the last slide, my contact details are there. Other than that, I do give it back to Chris.
Okay. Okay, now thank you very much, Chris Lim. Obviously, you'll stay on the line for your questions. And as mentioned before in my introduction, I now kind of like to hand over to Andy Soronsky, who will take us through how to successfully enter the market. Andy, please.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone who's on the webinar. So I'm going to build from what Chris has been talking about. So he set the scene, and now we're going to talk about how to effectively enter the market. So in terms of why target the Philippines, and I think Chris has already mentioned, it's a high growth market going at 6% a year, very young population. There's a very good acceptance of foreign brands, but as you'll see on the slide there's also a very strong local presence across the F&B sector and also in the retail side with companies like Mercury Drug, who are the powerhouse in the retail pharmaceutical sector, companies like Max's, who are there in the casual dining sector. So we really need to think about where does the Philippines sit within your expansion strategy, and how will your proposition work within the Philippines. Typically, as companies, whether they're American or UK companies, come into the Philippines, you can't just copy exactly the model that you have in the UK and then put it into the Philippines. There's usually some adjustment. So you really got to know who your customer is. Next slide, please. So in terms of determining your customer, what is it that you need to know? And so thank you. So what do we need to know? And I think you need to start with really understanding the background and country data. And Chris has actually put quite a bit of that into his first presentation. So build off the economic data and then the actual sector relevance, specific research around the sector. So whether you're in retail or if you're in F&B educational, services, really understand what your target market and your target sector is. There is a high regard for British products here. There's even a higher regard really for US products. So British products coming in and British brands are going to be competing against some very powerful US brands and some very powerful local brands as well. The other thing that I'd like to say here is that the research is critical in trying to find the right partner. Franchisees or prospective franchisees in the Philippines are very well informed. They're well traveled. A lot of the businesses here are family owned, and therefore they actually do travel a lot and have a wide understanding of what's in the marketplace. So when you're actually looking to enter the Philippine market, from the time you say yes, this is our target market, and we want to, and you start doing the research, by the time you actually get to completion, you're normally looking at about a 1-year period. So it's very important to do your research and then to start to narrow down the field of possible partners. Next slide, please. So the next part really comes about the know-who, and it's getting access to the right people and the decision makers. As mentioned, Philippines and most of Southeast Asia are typically family-owned businesses, so very different to the Anglo-Saxon model, which are more corporations. There is, as Chris mentioned, a young population, so there is now a growing number of young entrepreneurs who are very dynamic and open to new ideas. And these people are traditionally much easier to work with than the patriarchs and the matriarchs of the family-owned businesses. Those businesses are very traditionally run, and you need to really find the right person to talk to within these organizations. You need the decision makers, because ultimately, if you're not talking to the right person, particularly in markets like the Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, it becomes a very elongated process. So you can very quickly end up chasing your tail, and it can take a number of years to actually enter the market. So the secret is to get to the decision makers as early and as soon as possible. Next slide, please. So how do you get to these decision makers as quickly as possible? And there's a lot of associations already based. There's a lot of associations already based here in the Philippines that can really help you. The British Chamber, where we're webinaring from today, is a fantastic organisation in terms of its connections within the Philippines, and can actually sort of very quickly narrow down the search. There's also two very good professional bodies here in terms of the Franchise Association of the Philippines and the Filipino International Franchise Association. Again, working with those groups, they can actually open up the doors to those connections that you need to speak to and shorten the process of being able to enter the marketplace. Another methodology which certainly I'd encourage people to look at is each year the Philippines has a big franchise event, one of the largest in Asia. And taking a stand at one of those, at the show, again, with the amount of people that attend the show, it's about 10,000 that attend over a 2-3 day period, means you get access to a lot of people and some of the key decision makers. Outside of that, there's industry experts and brokers within the market who have the know-who, and again, can help you get to the decision makers and open up the door. And I think this is one of the most challenging things that both in the Philippines and other Southeast Asian markets. So as I mentioned, you can spend a lot of time actually not getting very far unless you know talking to the right associations and talking to the decision makers. So from that, we will move on to what we call the courtship. Next slide, please. And the courtship is definitely not a slow process. So once you've actually narrowed down the field to around about 4 or 5 possibles, it's about finding the ideal and the best match. But for this, you do need both dedication, patience, and regular visits. Just coming once into the marketplace and saying I've got a great proposition isn't going to work. You actually need to, it is very much a selling job with these business owners that this proposition is really going to work in the Philippines. If you've done the market research well, done the, looked at your category, your target market, and done that pre-work before, you give yourself a greater opportunity to be able to enter the market and find yourself a franchisee. Also, one of the things I would say is once you've started to narrow down the field, it's very good to have more than one option. So typically, once you start with a long list, you move to the non-disclosure agreement, and from that, you create a short list. What we've seen is where companies have at least 2 or 3 that move to a term sheet, then you've got the options to be able to negotiate a deal with one of them. Don't leave yourself in a position where you only have one potential option, because if that falls over, you're back to square one. So when you're getting to term sheet level with these with organisations, look to have minimum 2, but probably 3. That then will, as you start to narrow that down to that one which is most likely to sign up, then you get into those into the franchise agreement and the negotiation on the franchise agreement. Next slide, please. Now, those of you who are looking to franchise, you already know that franchise agreements tend to be long-term in nature. Usually it's a minimum of 5 years, but normally 10-year agreements with 10-year or 5-year extensions. Distributor agreements tend to be a little bit different and can be shorter. The time to negotiate the agreement itself typically lasts about 3 to 4 months. And you'll find that in the Philippines, that Filipino laws are a little bit quirky, and the recommendation is once you get to a term sheet stage is that you find a good local counsel to help you through the process. So don't look to just negotiate it from London or Manchester or wherever you're based. Make sure you've got a good local counsel who understands Filipino law. With some of the clauses within a standard franchise agreement will not apply here, particularly in the retail sector, especially if you're looking at joint venture agreements. So once we've got that franchise agreement in place, we're really very much ready to get into the market entry. Next slide, please. With my old background from Yum Brands, Krispy Kreme, and also PepsiCo, we found there was a good formula that would help set your franchisee and yourself for its success. So part of the process, whilst you're working on the franchise agreement, you start working on a market development strategic plan. So this is really sort of looking at, once you know where your category is, start looking at where you want to be, your trade zone mapping. The Philippines is nothing like the UK in terms of its trade zones. So really getting a good understanding of where you want to be is crucial. It's very expensive to get the first site wrong, and as I always say, you only get one chance to make a good impression. So making sure that you've done your trade zone mapping and knowing where you want to go, and it's the right place with your target market is crucial. That helps to set yourself up for success. And that's particularly true if it's a bricks and mortar type business. So if you're in retail or F&B, education, and you're actually putting up bricks and mortar, then it's absolutely crucial to do the market development plan, the trade zone mapping, so that you get your ideal first location. The other thing that's really a challenge in the Philippines, it's an archipelago. So the supply chain is a particular challenge. the ports, the roads, the truck bans, and also bringing products into the country. And there's a certain amount of localization that quite often happens. So don't underestimate the supply chain challenges of the Philippines. They're certainly overcomable, but you need to be aware of them. And then localization, particularly if you're in the F&B industry, localizing the products, some of your products, to local tastes is very, very important to get that broader appeal. Otherwise, it can end up being quite niche. Next slide, please. So speak to you about a recent British success. So Costa Coffee, I'm sure everybody has a Costa or a Starbucks back in the UK on a regular basis. They entered the market just over a year ago, and Costa partnered with a company called Robinson's here, who are a department store, and were sort of entering the F&B space. So they found themselves a very well-known Filipino company, well-regarded, very well-funded, certainly sector relevant because they're in the retail business. They were a good cultural fit in terms of their ethos with the Costa ethos. So a good partner. Being a retail business, they had very good access to quality real estate, and already there was very good people in place and strong operations. So today, Costa, they're in the process of opening their 6th, 7th, and 8th stores. The first 5 are open and trading successfully. So this is one of the latest examples of a recent British success story. We also have other brands which are looking to enter into the Philippines and are in different parts of that process, which I've just described to you. That brings me to the end of my presentation on how to make a successful market entry, and I'll hand it back over to Chris.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to both Andy and Chris for those two, I think, very informative presentations. Obviously, this is the section now where we have the questions. So I'm looking for the questions, actually. That's it for one. Okay, we have one question here. Oh, they're coming in. Okay. So from Peter Whitehouse, so this is to Chris Lim. Does the Philippines require products and services to repair leather, furniture, automotive, and fashion sectors? So I hope Chris Lim can hear that.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, well, actually, in terms of repair of furniture.
I think we'll have to get to him. Okay, did you answer?
Yeah, in terms of repairing furniture, yes, there could be an industry there. Actually, our family has been in the furniture industry for the past 100 years. So it is something actually of a sector that's underrepresented, and there are no credible ones to repair furniture here. In terms of automotive, same thing. There are quite a few. Some of our biggest franchise brands are actually in the automotive repair industry. So there is opportunity there. I think the big challenge here is how do you compete with both the branded ones as well as those that you can get on the side street who can probably do the same thing for half the price than the branded ones.
This is from Jelani Gulam, and it says, please could you tell me more about the connectivity, internet and broadband in the Philippines? There you go, and an easy one to answer.
I think the words I think Christopher used was it's choppy, and there's certainly the infrastructure to give you the Wi-Fi across the Philippines is not fully there. So although the mobile coverage itself is pretty good, and you've got some strong providers here in terms of Smart and Globe, the Wi-Fi is the area that certainly is difficult. And when it rains here, which it does 5 months of the year, then the connectivity and the broadband issues become much, much worse. So typically from June to November, you'll find we suffer much worse than we do the rest of the year.
Okay, thank you, Andy. This one is also for both. Well, I'll ask Chris to answer this one. It's also from Jelani Gulam. What is the appetite for the use of remote distance meeting, training, learning, etc.? So what is the appetite for the use of remote distance meeting, training, and learning?
Remote distance learning, training is actually still quite a small sector here in the Philippines. I think it's connected to Andy's comments about the internet being very slow. So people do still want a face-to-face meeting, and a lot of smaller companies don't actually invest too much in their training budget. So it's still not as developed as it was in the UK or some of the big multinationals. So I haven't seen a very big appetite for that. And even if people started to want to have it, I think the infrastructure is not yet there to support it, given the laggard Wi-Fi and internet speeds.
Aren't in that, but it's the way you can transfer those skills in more of a classroom setting. Filipinos are very much receptive to the approach where you've got a classroom, you've got qualified tutors, industry experts imparting that knowledge. So that's still a much stronger sector, and it is very much a fledgling sector, the online learning. So versus markets like UK, USA, where that's very much well developed, and you've got the mobile, the massive online communication method now, where things like Ivy League universities are now, or education is now going online. That's still a long way away here in the Philippines.
Okay. Andy, thank you very much. Our next question is from a John Cardan, and he says, have the speakers had success developing contacts through the British Chamber? So I'll ask Andy, then I'll ask Chris. So Andy, do you want to go next?
The answer is very much yes. We've helped the largest UK casual dining brand, who aren't yet on the ground, but are in the process of getting on the ground in the Philippines. And the British Chamber was instrumental in finding connections to actually get to the right people, those decision makers, and really help short-circuit the process. I think there's two things here to mention about the British Chamber. The British Chamber have got people like Chris, who's the chairman, but the president of the organisation is an extremely well-connected Filipino who used to work for a major UK multinational. So with that, they actually have a very wide base of connections, and certainly in our case, they were very, very helpful in connecting us with the people that matter. Over to you, Christopher.
Yeah, I think in terms of the British Chamber, so one of our businesses is really to help match international businesses to and open doors locally. The British Chamber actually, we have just started working with them, but as early as about 2 months ago, we did have a big event where we brought in about 8 Singaporean brands here in the Philippines, and the British Chamber did help us connect with other people, speak with other people, and invite people to that event, because they do have quite a wide network and are very active in a lot of activities around the Philippines. So they do have that very deep connections within the business industry.
identifying the franchising business, obviously in the Philippines. So we'll go Chris, then Andy. That's okay. So Chris, I hope you heard that. What are the current trends in the franchising business that you could say identify in the Philippines at the moment?
Yeah, I think one of the big trends in the franchise industry is that, you know, people who used to come in here and want a franchise, they'd be happy with 10 or 20 branches. But more and more these days, I've seen many people really looking at immediately opening, whether it's 50, 100 branches within the first few years. And it's really because of their access to train professionals to run their franchise business, but also to expand into the other islands. And we see a lot of development south of the Philippines. And we do see Davao, where our new president is from, as it's always been the promised land for the past 20 years. It's always been a promise, but now I think there is a lot of development coming on there. So there is that big development where outlets and business is developed not just in Metro Manila, but immediately into the outer sectors of Metro Manila and into other secondary cities.
Just repeat the same question for Andy, which is what are the current trends that he could identify, as Chris has identified, in the franchising business in the Philippines?
Okay, so some of the trends, so building from what Chris has said, but I'll go more into some of the sectors. Things that we see because of the growth in the middle classes, there's growing requirement for premiumization. So people want to see more premium products, both in the areas of food and beverage, but also in the whole retail sector. So people are certainly looking to trade up from that perspective. We also, within the sector, we're seeing that the casual dining sector for sure is growing very, very quickly. So the market entry point in years gone by in the F&B was very much in terms of the QSR industry, where you had a lot of socioeconomic class C and D. So now that there's more and more higher end restaurants, higher end brands coming in, and a very, very strong growth in that whole casual dining side of things. Education is another aspect which mentioned, although things like online courses, which was asked from a previous speaker, isn't that strong here. Filipinos do invest a lot in terms of their education, and here parents make very strong sacrifices. So that's another growing trend in how much money is being invested in education and actually bringing their kids up and that further education within the young adults. So those are sort of three strong trends that you see, plus the trend in that whole use of mobile phones, mobile apps. You've got some of the highest percentage usage in the world here on things like Instagram, Facebook. So that's also a massive growing trend.
Okay, thank you. We got actually another question come in, and this is from. Oh, I'm sorry. Please, Chris, you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Andy has said. I think education really is something that is booming here in the Philippines, especially children's education, whether it's preschools or enrichment education. Enrichment used to be mainly academic, but more and more parents have started to invest in non-academic enrichment education, whether that's in the arts, in music. One big trend we foresee is people investing a bit more in education on the programming or the more on the technology side. So if you are in that business, it may be something interesting here in the Philippines.
Actually come in to us. This is from Yolanda Danday. What percentage do we need to charge as service fees if we provide our expertise to the local market. So I think I'll ask Andy first and then also ask Chris to comment. So I'll just repeat the question. What percentage do we need to charge for service fees if we provide our expertise to the local market? Andy.
Sure. I think that becomes sector specific. One of the industries that we work very closely is the broader food and beverage and food industry. But usually, when the typical percentage is somewhere around about 5 to 6% for the services for the use of the brand. As you go into different sectors, it will change. So a very difficult question to answer, so I'll leave it with just speaking about the F&B industry, which is one which I feel comfortable that answer is accurate and correct.
Okay. Andy, sorry, Andy, I apologize. Chris, could you like to comment, please?
Yeah, I think in terms of royalty rates, I've seen people come in. As Andy said, it's very sector specific and even sometimes brand and quite brand specific. But I have seen, as Andy said, F&B at about 5 to 6%. Education tends to be in the double digits. I've seen it anywhere between 15 to 25%. In terms of retail tends to be a lot lower in terms of royalties, but that's basically because they usually put in the service fees as part of the sale of the merchandise. So quite varied, and it is very sector specific, and even brand specific. Different brands will have very different rates.
The first thing I'd like to do, of course, is actually thank on behalf of everybody, first of all, our two speakers. Obviously, is Chris Lim. Thank you very much indeed for your time. And obviously, my partner sitting next to me here, Andy Soronsky. I'd also like to thank everybody who's listened in. Before you go off, I'd also like to make a couple of points. The first is that we will have an electronics webinar on August 31st. We have a cross-sector trade mission to the Philippines from the 4th to the 6th of October. We will also be requesting if you can kindly fill in a webinar evaluation survey. And of course, all our speakers, the two speakers' presentations, will be made available to every participant. So on behalf of the British Chamber of the Philippines, I'd like to wish everybody in London a very good Friday. And for everybody here in the Philippines, I'm going to wish them a good weekend because we're at the end of our week. So thank you very much. Have a great time. I appreciate all the time. Chris, thank you very much for dialing in. And once again, thank you very much. And we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.